The first time I noticed him, it was because he waved like he knew me. Not a casual little lift of the hand. Not a polite gesture to a stranger across the alley. He stood at his window, still, silent, watching. Then he raised his hand and waved at exactly 10:17 p.m. Every night after that, I waited for it. My name is Nolan Mercer. I was 29 when this started, and I lived alone on the 3rd floor of Ashford Court, a tired brick apartment building wedged between a laundromat and an abandoned print shop on the east side of the city. The place smelled like old paint, wet concrete, and somebody's burnt coffee every morning at 6 o'clock. I worked remote editing video captions for a media company, which meant my life had a pattern so predictable it almost felt safe. Wake up late. Work from the desk by my window. Order cheap takeout. Ignore my phone. Sleep too little. Repeat. Across the narrow alley lived my neighbor, Mr. Daniel Mercer. He was in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. Thin. Neat. Always wore the same faded gray shirt when I saw him. He kept his apartment immaculate. I knew that only because his windows were always open just enough to let the light spill through the curtains, and the inside always looked carefully arranged. A chair by the window, a small table, a lamp, a shelf lined with books. He never spoke to me, not once. He just waved. At first I assumed it was one of those things older people do when they think they recognize someone. Maybe he mistook me for a son, a neighbor from years ago, a man he used to know. So I waved back. That became the routine. At 10:17 every night, his hand would rise in that same slow, deliberate motion. 2 or 3 small movements. Then the curtain would fall back into place. I started timing it, without meaning to. That kind of repetition gets into your head. You think you're just noticing a pattern. Then one night, you realize the pattern is noticing you. The week it happened, I was already in a strange mood. My younger sister Mara had called to tell me our mother was doing worse, and I had spent most of the evening staring at my phone without answering. I remember sitting at my desk, hearing the rain hit the window, when I looked up and saw Mr. Mercer waiting. The clock said 10:17. He lifted his hand. I waved back automatically. Then I froze. Because for the first time, I saw his face clearly. He wasn't smiling. He looked tired. Not sleepy tired. Not old tired. Afraid. And even though he only stayed in the window for a second or two, something in the way he looked at me made my stomach turn cold. The next morning, I told myself I was being dramatic. People get strange expressions. Bad lighting does weird things. Lonely brains invent stories where none exist. That was the logic I used, and for a few days, it worked. Thus, Ashford Court was full of people who kept to themselves. There was Mrs. Alvarez in apartment 2B, the building manager, who knew everyone's name, everyone's rent date, and everyone's business. There was the old man on the first floor who played jazz loudly enough to shake the pipes. There was the college girl in 4A who never answered the hallway greetings and always had food delivery, arriving after midnight. And there was me. I wasn't exactly social, I had friends technically. A couple of guys from college who texted me memes and asked for favors. My sister Mara called me twice a week whether I wanted her to or not. But mostly I lived in the small space between work and silence. Mr. Mercer was the one exception. Not because we talked. Because he existed in a way that made the building feel less empty. I started noticing little things about him. He cleaned the glass of his window every Tuesday. He read thick paperbacks with cracked spines. He never uses overhead light after 9:30, only the lamp. When he waved, it was always with his right hand. I know that because one evening I was on a work call and didn't look up right away. When I finally glanced across the alley, his hand was already halfway down. I felt ridiculous for caring, but I wrote it off in my mind like a detail in a movie. Then, one Friday, I passed him in the hallway. We nearly collided at the stairwell. Up close, he looked smaller than I expected, more fragile. He carried a grocery bag in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. His eyes were pale blue and sharp in a way that made me think he was looking through me, not at me.
Evening.
His voice was dry but warm. I almost dropped my keys. Oh, hey. He nodded once, polite, as if we had been neighbors for years. I should have said something normal, something about the weather maybe. Or the building. Instead I said, "You wave at me every night." He stopped. For a second I thought I had offended him. Then he smiled faintly and said,
Do I?
and walked past me. That should have been the end of it, but the way he said it made me feel like he was pretending not to remember. like he knew exactly what I meant. For about 2 weeks after that, everything went back to normal. I worked. I ate. I avoided my sister's calls when I was tired and answered when I felt guilty. Mara wanted me to visit our mother more often. She wanted me to stop acting like I could outrun family responsibility by becoming invisible in a third-floor apartment with good Wi-Fi. She was probably right. At night, I sat by the window because the room felt smaller if I stayed anywhere else. That was when I noticed the alley had its own rhythm. Delivery bikes passing. Somebody smoking below. The buzzy hum of a neon sign from the laundromat. Rainwater dripping from old fire escapes. The city breathing in its sleep. And every night at 10:17, Mr. Mercer waved. Sometimes I waved back lazily. Sometimes I didn't notice until too late, and he would still raise his hand as if he expected me to be looking. That should have been comforting. It was comforting at first. Then it started feeling like a test. One night I came home later than usual and found a note taped to my door from Mrs. Alvarez. Mr. Mercer's daughter called. "She's trying to reach him. If you see him, let me know." That was it. No explanation, no context. Just that sentence pinned to my door like a bad omen. I went downstairs immediately. Mrs. Alvarez was behind the desk in the lobby, wrapped in a cardigan, reading a magazine. "Daniel Mercer's daughter?" I asked. She looked up.
You know him?
Sort of. He lives across from me. Her face changed in a way I didn't like.
You haven't heard?
Heard what? She lowered the magazine slowly.
He hasn't been answering his phone. His daughter says he missed a dinner reservation 3 nights ago. Didn't show up for breakfast the next morning. No one's seen him outside the building.
I stared at her. Maybe he's out? She gave me a look that said she had already thought of that.
That's what she thought. But his keys are still in his mailbox. Mail is piling up, and his daughter says he always checks in.
I felt a mild, irrational chill. Has she contacted the police?
She did this morning.
Missing person?
Probably, although the police don't always move fast for an older man who lives alone.
I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Then I asked, "Have you checked his apartment?" She gave a tired shrug.
His daughter has, said everything looked normal. Too normal, according to her.
I thanked her and went back upstairs. When I got to my room, I went straight to the window. His curtains were drawn, the lamp was off. I waited. 10:17 came and went. Nothing. That was the first night in months he did not wave. And somehow that worried me more than if he had. The next morning I went to the lobby and asked Mrs. Alvarez if she had heard anything from the police.
Not yet.
"Do you think he's okay?" She hesitated.
Men like Daniel Mercer don't just vanish, but they do get stubborn.
That was not reassuring. I was about to leave when I noticed a flyer on the bulletin board near the mailboxes. Missing person Daniel Mercer, 68. Last seen at Ashford Court. Call this number if you have any information. His face on that paper felt wrong. Too flat, too official. Too small for the person I had seen across the alley every night. That evening, I tried to convince myself not to look. I worked late, ordered noodles, left my curtains half closed. Still at 10:17, I looked. And there he was, standing in the window, waving. I nearly dropped my phone. The relief hit me first, and then the fear hit harder. Because now I knew something impossible was happening. He was missing. The police were looking for him, and yet there he was across the alley, raising his hand like nothing had changed. I called Mrs. Alvarez immediately. She answered on the second ring.
What?
I just saw him. A pause, then carefully,
Saw who?
Daniel Mercer. He was in his window. Silence. Then she said,
Nolan, his daughter, is here.
My throat went dry. What?
She's in his apartment right now with the police.
I looked back at the window. The figure was still there, still waving. My pulse hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. That's not possible, I whispered. Mrs. Alvarez's voice dropped.
Nolan, are you sure you saw him?
I didn't answer. Because I was staring across the alley at the window, and this time the figure didn't wave. It stood perfectly still. Then very slowly it lowered its hand and pointed down. I backed away from the window so fast I hit my desk. My laptop shook. My chair tipped over. For a second I thought maybe I had mistaken the motion. Maybe it was only a shadow from the street lamp, but the finger was still pointed, straight down, toward the alley between the buildings. I called the police, not because I believed them yet, because I no longer trusted myself. When they arrived, 2 officers and Mrs. Alvarez went up to Mr. Mercer's apartment while I waited in the hall. His daughter was there too, red-eyed and furious, insisting her father had disappeared 3 days ago. Her name was Elise. She looked nothing like him except for the eyes. When the officers opened the apartment, it was exactly what everyone had said: neat, quiet, too quiet. His chair was pulled away from the window, his lamp was off. There was a cup on the table with dried tea at the bottom. His bed looked untouched. No signs of a struggle. No blood, no broken glass, no footprints. One of the officers turned to Elise and asked when she had last spoken to her father.
Sunday. He sounded normal. He said he was tired. He told me he'd call after dinner, then nothing.
Did he mention anyone bothering him?
No.
Any recent changes? Neighbors? Visitors?
Elise shook her head. I stood in the doorway, trying not to feel stupid. Then the second officer asked.
Who lives across the alley?
I raised my hand like an idiot. Me? He looked at me.
You reported seeing him tonight.
Yes.
You're sure?
I'm sure he was there. Elise snapped her head toward me.
You saw my father?
From my window. She moved closer.
What was he doing?
I hesitated. He was waving. Her face went pale.
That's not possible.
I looked at her. Why not? She swallowed.
Because he broke his wrist last month.
The room went quiet. The officer frowned.
Did he?
Yes, he was in a brace. He could barely move it.
I felt my skin go cold. I had watched that hand wave every night. Right hand, same motion, same angle. I had seen it too many times to mistake it. The officers looked around the apartment again, but they found nothing useful. One of them asked if the building had maintenance access to the back alley. Mrs. Alvarez said yes, but it had not been used in years. That detail stayed with me. Not because it sounded important, because when I left the apartment and went back to my room, I noticed something I had never paid attention to before. On the far wall beside the fire escape, half hidden behind a stack of old pallets, there was a metal maintenance door I had never seen opened. It sat between our building and the old print shop, painted over, rusted shut. And beneath it, in the narrow strip of alley light, was a fresh smear on the concrete. Like something heavy had been dragged there recently. I didn't sleep that night. At 10:17, I looked across the alley. Mr. Mercer's window was dark. Then, from somewhere below it, a flashlight flickered once, twice. Then the window curtain moved. Not from inside the apartment, from behind the glass. Something was there, something hidden, and then I saw it. A hand, not waving, pushing. Just for a second, the fingers pressed against the lower edge of the window, as if someone inside was trying to get a message out. Then the light vanished, and a shadow crossed the room behind the curtain. A bigger shadow, one that did not belong to Mr. Mercer. The next morning, I started paying attention to details I had ignored before. The maintenance door. The alley drain grate. The pattern of footsteps in the wet concrete after rain. I called my sister, who told me I sounded obsessed.
Maybe you need to let the police handle it.
I think something's wrong. Something is always wrong when you live in that building. This is different. She was quiet for a second.
Then be careful.
I didn't tell her how scared I was, because once I started looking, the building itself began to feel suspicious. Mrs. Alvarez kept a master key in a locked box behind her desk. The old print shop next door had been empty for years, but its back door was padlocked from the inside, and the maintenance door in the alley looked newer than the rest of the wall, like it had been painted over to hide it. I waited until midnight and went downstairs with my phone flashlight. The alley was damp and silent. I kept expecting some normal explanation to appear. A cat. A stray pipe sound. Anything. Instead, I found the maintenance door slightly open. Not wide. Just enough for a draft to leak through. I hesitated, listening. A soft metallic clink echoed from inside. I pushed the door open. A narrow service corridor stretched behind the wall, dark and low, lined with old pipes and peeling insulation. It smelled like mold, dust, and stale water. My flashlight beam shook in my hand. Halfway down the corridor, I saw something written on the wall in faded pencil. Keep quiet. I stopped breathing, then I heard it. A faint knock. 3 taps from deeper inside. I whispered, "Mr. Mercer?" A pause. Then, so weak I almost missed it, a voice answered.
Yes.
I nearly dropped the phone. I rushed forward, following the sound past the pipes, around a bend, until I reached a small utility room hidden behind the print shop's basement wall. The door was chained from the outside. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my phone up to the lock. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, heavy, coming down the corridor. I turned. The flashlight beam hit a man standing at the far end of the hallway. Big shoulders, work boots, gray jacket. I knew that face. It was Victor Hale, the building superintendent. He had lived in the neighborhood for years. Everyone trusted him because he fixed leaks, replaced bulbs, and smiled at tenants like he cared. He looked at me for one long second. Then he said very calmly,
"You should not be down here."
Behind me, from inside the locked room, something thudded against the wall. A desperate sound. A human sound. Victor's gaze shifted to the door, then back to me. And that was when I understood. Mr. Mercer wasn't missing. He had been hidden. And Victor Hale had known exactly where. The next second, Victor lunged forward and the flashlight went flying. The corridor exploded into darkness, and from behind the chained door, I heard Mr. Mercer scream my name. The scream was so sudden, so raw, that for a second I forgot to move. Then Victor grabbed my arm and slammed me into the wall. Pain flashed through my shoulder. My phone skidded across the concrete. I could hear Mr. Mercer pounding from inside the room.
Nolan, don't let him.
Victor drove an elbow into my ribs. Air left my lungs in a sharp burst. I swung blindly and hit something solid. He cursed. The hallway was dark except for the weak spill of light from the open maintenance door behind us. In that narrow strip of gray, I saw Victor's face twist from calm to panic. Not rage. Panic. The kind a man feels when he realizes he is no longer in control. I scrambled for my phone, found it by touch, and threw the flashlight on. Victor flinched. That gave me half a second. I ran straight past him, lunged for the chained utility room door, and yanked at the lock with both hands. From inside came Mr. Mercer's voice, hoarse and broken.
Left side. The chain is loose.
I looked. He was right. The chain had been fastened in a hurry. One of the links was bent. I jammed my fingers into the gap and pulled until the metal screamed. Victor shouted behind me and charged. I braced myself, but before he reached me, a new sound rolled through the corridor. Police sirens, close, very close. Victor stopped cold. So did I. From somewhere in the building above us, someone was shouting. Mrs. Alvarez, maybe, or one of the officers from earlier. I had no idea how the police had gotten here so fast, but the timing felt like a miracle. Victor's face changed. He looked from the stairs to me to the locked door. Then he did the one thing I had not expected. He ran. He bolted down the corridor toward the back of the print shop, moving with the speed of a man who knew every exit in the building. I did not chase him. I kept pulling the chain until the lock finally gave way and the door swung open. Mr. Mercer was inside. He was sitting on the floor, one ankle chained to a pipe, his wrist bruised, his shirt soaked through with sweat. He looked thinner than before, his face hollowed out by exhaustion. But he was alive. When he saw me, he closed his eyes for a second, as if he could not believe I was real.
You saw the window.
I nodded too fast. I saw you waving. A broken laugh left him. Not humor. Relief.
It was the only way.
I crouched beside him and fumbled with the chain. What happened? He swallowed hard.
Victor found out I was asking questions.
About what? Mr. Mercer glanced toward the hallway, then lowered his voice.
About the building accounts, the storage access, the old service rooms. He has been renting space under the building without telling the owners. Cash payments, no records. I kept noticing people coming and going through the alley at odd hours.
I stared at him. He nodded once.
I used to be a locksmith. I know old buildings. I found the hidden corridor by accident. I told Victor I would report it.
And he locked you in here?
He said I was confused. Then he said if I caused trouble, he would make sure no one believed me. He told Elise I had gone away for a few days. Then he started bringing food down through the service door. Not enough to keep me strong, just enough to keep me alive.
I looked around the room. There were water bottles, a folded blanket, an old chair, a portable lamp. This was not a random hiding place. It was prepared. Victor had planned to keep him here. For how long, I did not want to know. I finally broke the chain free and helped Mr. Mercer to his feet. He could barely stand. "You were waving at me," I said. He nodded slowly.
I saw your window every night. Light on, curtain open. You were the only person who looked back.
That sentence hit harder than everything else. Because it told me why I had been chosen. Not by accident. Because I had been paying attention. We moved toward the stairwell, but before we reached it, one of the police officers came down the corridor with Mrs. Alvarez behind him. She stopped dead when she saw Mr. Mercer. Then she covered her mouth with both hands. Elise arrived a second later. She made one sound, halfway between a sob and a gasp, and ran to her father. Mr. Mercer tried to hold himself together, but when he saw her, he broke. She hugged him so hard he almost folded in half. I turned away and wiped my face before anyone could see. That should have been the end of it. But mysteries like this do not end neatly. They widen. The police searched the print shop basement and found what Victor had been hiding. Stacks of tenant files, envelope after envelope of cash payments, a notebook filled with dates, names, and coded entries. Utilities paid in fake names, rented rooms that did not exist on paper. And in a locked storage space behind a false wall, they found cameras aimed at. Victor had been watching him. He had been watching all of us. By the end of the night, Victor was in custody. He tried to talk his way out of it at first, claiming Mr. Mercer was confused, claiming I had broken into the basement, claiming the recordings were for security. But the evidence was too clear, too ugly. One of the officers found a hidden keyring in his coat pocket that opened the service corridor and the utility room. Another found a sheet of paper with Mr. Mercer's apartment schedule on it, marked with the exact time he usually sat by the window. At 10:17, that number made my skin crawl. Victor had known the pattern all along. He had used it. He had waited until Mr. Mercer was predictable. That was the part that made me angrier than anything else, not the kidnapping. Not the lies, the planning, the patience, the fact that a man could turn another person's habit into a prison.